My son Aryan was born on November of 2024, and earlier this year, the first thing that I did was to open an RESP account for him. And if you know anything about me, I researched the shit out of this topic. I watched all the videos, read all the articles so that I can optimize this account for his education. And I am now ready to make a comprehensive guide of my own how to maximize your RESP contribution for your child. So let's get started. If you are new to this channel, my name is Navjot and I talk about personal finance, investing and business on this channel. So if you like this video, do hit the like button and share it with a friend so that more people like you can benefit from this. So in today's video, we'll be talking about benefits of RESP. We'll be talking about rules and limits around it. We'll then be talking about the government grant which is called the CESG, Canada Education Savings Grant. We'll then talk about strategy to invest, and I'll talk about my strategy which can be different from your strategy. I'll give you everything in an Excel, a downloadable Excel. We'll talk about withdrawal from RESP for education. And the biggest question that I've been asked on Instagram is that can we withdraw for education from RESP if the child is not actually pursuing education in Canada? What if they want to go to US, India, UK? All that can happen. We don't know what's going to happen, but can we do that? We'll talk about that. And then what if my kid does not go to college or university? What happens to the grant? What happens to RESP? How do we withdraw money from it? What are the penalties? We'll talk all about that. So this video is slightly going to be longer, but I promise you that this will be the most comprehensive guide that you'll ever want to know around RESP. Let's talk about the benefits of RESP. It's called Registered Education Savings Plan. I don't know why they call TFSA savings account, savings plan. This is not a savings account. This is to save for your child's post-secondary education, but it's not a savings account. You have to invest the money to take full advantage of this account. I don't understand why they are called savings accounts. Anyways, there are two benefits to this. The first one is you get a CESG, Canada Education Savings Grant, which is 20% of your contribution. So let's say you contribute $1,000 a year, you get 20% of that, $200 free money from the government. But there are lifetime limits that we'll be talking about when we go to the section of grants. But that's the first benefit. You get free money from the government that actually compounds across the 16, 18 years, however long you are investing in that. And all that compounding can be then used towards your child's education. And the second advantage here is that it's tax sheltered growth. If you put the money in now, it continues to grow for the next 18 years. Still, Aryan goes to college, and when we take the money out, all the growth that you have, you obviously have to pay tax on it, but it's taxed on Aryan's income and not my income, which obviously will be a lot higher if I was doing, paying the tax on my income. Because the beneficiary is Aryan and his education, all that growth in the account will be taxed on his income, which will be very little at that time. And therefore, and with the tax credits and everything, we'll talk about that in a bit, it will almost be negligible. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about withdrawal, but those are the two advantages of doing RESP. Rules and limits around this. The first one is parent and beneficiary. They have to be Canadian resident with a valid SIN. Now, you can be on work permit and start contributing towards RESP, and you should go to an accountant, to check that. But if you leave Canada before your kid actually goes and pursues education, you might lose your grant at least, and you will have to pay penalty on any income that you generate or any growth that you have on your money. We'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, if you're a work permit holder with a clear path of being a PR and then a citizen, all you need to have is a valid SIN, and both you and the beneficiary, which is your child, should have that. After tax dollars go into RESP, and it's not like RRSP. What I mean by that is in RRSP, your pre-tax money can go into RRSP and you get the tax advantage there. But in RESP, it's all after-tax money going into RESP. The tax advantage that you get comes a little bit later, like I explained, that when the money is being used for education, that money, all the growth will not be taxed on my income, but it will be taxed on Aryan's income. Lifetime contribution, there's a lifetime contribution to this. This is not unlimited. Obviously, the lifetime contribution is $50,000, which is a lot. And we'll talk about how it compounds to. Lifetime government grant contribution is also not unlimited, and it's $7,200, and there are annual contribution limits. We'll talk about that when we talk about grants, and you should start as early as possible because the grant actually stops at 17. The reason why I say that is if your child is already 15, 14, and you have never contributed to RESP, you can only contribute the maximum of 3-4 years now, because at 17 the grant will actually stop, and even if you have room available in your RESP, the grant will actually not come to you. So it's important that we do that as early as possible, so that we have the maximum available time to maximize the grant, because there is an annual limit to the grant. Talking about the grant, you have a 20% of your, so the calculation goes like this. It is 20% of your contribution. So whatever you contribute is 20% of that, up to a maximum of $500 per year. That's why it's important to do it as early as possible, because the maximum that you can get a grant is of $500 per year, not more than that, irrespective of what your contribution is. So as an example, if you contribute $1,000 in any given year, you will get a grant of 20%, which is $200. If you do $2,500, you'll maximize the grant at $500, and if you do $3,000, or if you do $50,000 all at once, or $10,000, whatever it is, you'll only still get a grant of $500, because it's 20% or $500, whichever is lower. However, there is one exception to this. If you, in case you miss 1 year because you lost a job in that year, or you missed the contribution, or whatever, that in my case, he was born in November of 2024, and I started contributing in 2025. Very similar. I missed 1 year. I can carry forward that grant to the next year. So this year I'll be investing $5,000. I'll get 500 plus 500, $1,000 of grant all in 1 year. So you can carry forward 1 year of grant to the next year, but you cannot do 4 years in a row or all together for 4 years, $10,000 and get the $2,000 of grant. That's not possible, but you can carry forward 1 year of contribution. And like I said, the lifetime grant is $7,200 per child, which actually changes the strategy around RESP. Now, you might say the strategy is simple. You invest, $2,500 a year, you maximize the grant at $500, and you are done. But that's not that easy, because Aryan is likely to go to university when he turns 18. So let me take my example, and let's assume that I max out the contribution at $2,500 dollars. Obviously, I can make unlimited contribution to my RESP. There's no limit to the amount of contribution that I make, but in order to maximize the grant that I get, $2,500 is all I can do. I can do $3,000, $4,000, whatever, but $2,500 will give me the maximum possible grant. There'll not be any incremental benefit of me contributing more than $2,500. So $2,500 I invest for 14 years, and that's $35,000 of my contribution into RESP, and the grant will be $500 per year multiplied by 14 years. That's $7,000 of grant that I've taken. Only $200 of grant is left, which will happen in year 15. The moment I invest $1,000, I'll get again 20% of the grant, which is $200, and that way I'll maximize my grant of $7,200 in just under 15 years, but my overall contribution will be $36,000. But my contribution limit that I have, my maximum contribution that I can make, is $50,000. So you maximized your grant in year 15 at $7,200. That's amazing, but your overall contribution is $36,000, which is $14,000 less than your maximum contribution that you can make. Now you have two options. There's nothing wrong in both these options. The first option is that you do not invest anything more into RESP because you already got the grant. You get all the compounding. You compound that to about $85,000, $90,000 by the time your child, in my case Aryan, goes to a university, and you're happy with that. The other way to look at this is that you can actually use this RESP if you're 100% sure that your child is going to pursue education, which in many cases it is the case. You front load the $14,000 so that you maximize your contribution. You actually put the $14,000 in year 1, and then you maximize growth. You give it 18 years to grow, and that way you can actually end up with almost $30,000 to $40,000 of more money in your RESP. And I know it's very complicated, so I have made an Excel that you can download from the description, but let me explain how I've done this Excel. Obviously, the lifetime contribution is $50,000, $7,200 is the lifetime grant. Do not look at this for now. I talk about that when I talk about withdrawal and if your child doesn't go to college, so I'll not look at what's there. And let's assume that your current RESP balance is 0, your grant received is 0, you have not contributed ever. You are like me, whose child was born in the next, again, I'm making, your child could be 5 years old and you have made some contributions. Just put those numbers here if you know those numbers. Let's assume that we'll continue to invest for the next 18 years. Monthly contribution, let's assume for this example at $2,500 divided by 12. That's the contribution that maxes out my grant. So that's $208 and change per month. I don't front load anything. I assume an 8% year-on-year return. I make a total contribution of $45,000 in 18 years. So I'll be making a contribution for 18 years, but I'll obviously max out my grant at year 15. And I'll end with $118,853. That's my money. That's amazing. I can use that towards Aryan's education, and I'm very happy with that. Amazing. But I have not maxed out. So it says, oops, you have not maxed out your lifetime contribution of $50,000. If my child is going and I'm very sure that they are going for education, I think we should max out this contribution because it is tax-free growth and it's taxed at Aryan's tax rate, which will be negligible when he withdraws that money. And therefore, I would want to max it out. Now, one way to maximize this contribution is that you actually increase the money that you're putting every month to $250. You'll be investing $3,000. You'll still be getting not 20%, but $500, which is because even if you do $3,000 a year, you don't get 20% of that $600. You get lower of $600 or $500. So you still get $500, but in this case, you still maxed out $250, $50,000 contribution. You got $135,000 for kids' education, tuition fee, transportation expenses. We'll talk about the withdrawal in a bit. And that way you are at least maximizing. So that's one way of doing it. That's my preferred way, even though the other way is actually pretty awesome. Let's say that you do the minimum possible, which is $208 a month, but because at year 15 you invested $36,000 and you maxed out your grant, you actually front load the remaining $14,000 in year 1. So instead of doing $2,500 in year 1, you're doing $14,000 of front loading plus $2,500. And you're only getting the grant for $500, which is fine because you're not going to get the grant on the $14,000 anyways. Like I explained, it maxes out at $36,000 of contribution. So you actually are better off doing the $14,000 upfront, and that way you can actually end up with $167,000 in your RESP. That's the beauty of compounding the $14,000 upfront. If you don't want to do $14,000, altogether, you can actually split that into 2 years. Let's say you do $7,000 in year 1, $7,000 in year 2, you are still at $165,000. If you don't want to do this, you can do whatever, right? So $5,000, I do $4,000. I still end up with $163,000. So you can actually end up making about $30,000 more and compounding the $14,000 of money that is not going to give you any grant, but the condition is that you actually put that money up front, and there's no one stopping you from doing that because the amount of contribution that you can make in one single year can be $50,000 as well. But to maximize the benefit, I think $14,000 of front loading would make the most sense. But even if I know that $14,000 putting up front would maximize my RESP, I'm not doing that, and there's a reason for that. I'll talk about that when we talk about withdrawals if my kid does not go for education. Stay tuned for that. Let's talk about the strategy and where do I invest at $250 per month. So my strategy is not to do minimum. My strategy is to do $250 a month so that I maximize contribution of $50,000. I don't front load anything. I'll talk about that why in a bit. But my strategy right now, and I don't love this because for all my investing, I use Wealthsimple. For RESP, I have to use Questrade because my Wealthsimple does not have self-directed investing. Now, some of you would have that because they are piloting this. You can self-direct invest into RESP. Wealthsimple did not have that earlier, but the moment my Wealthsimple gets this feature, I will move everything to Wealthsimple, or I'll continue investing in Wealthsimple from next year onwards. But right now, I'm doing Questrade, and the reason why I don't like that is because Questrade does not allow for fractional buying. I would love to do a 50% into VFE, which is S&P 500, and 50% into XQQ. But because I cannot do fractional buying for at least these shares, Questrade also allows for fractional buying, but that's only for if I invest in VOO, which is the US equivalent of VFE. It's on select ETFs only. I can't really do a 50-50 because if I invest in VFE, and that's about $147, as of today, I have to invest one share, which is $147 in VFE, and the remainder of probably 2 or 3 shares into XQQ. And that actually just, changes my contribution to 60-40 into VFE and XEQ. Now, I don't mind that. I've been doing that, for the last 6 months, but I don't love that either. So that's why I said that if you are using Wealthsimple and if you are able to do self-directing in your Wealthsimple, if that feature is available to you, I would use Wealthsimple so that you are able to do 50-50. If you don't want to do that, if you are already using Questrade, use that Questrade as well. Don't overcomplicate whether to invest in VFE, XEQ. Obviously, there's withholding tax if you invest in US-based companies, but it's only on dividends, and dividends are very less when it comes to these two, ETFs. So I'll not obsess over what to invest in. I am simply wanting to do 50-50, and once Wealthsimple comes, I'll be able to do a pure 50-50 rather than in Questrade where I'm slightly able to do 60-40 because I don't have access to fractional buying yet. Now let's talk about the big one. How do we withdraw money for our education, or in a rare case where the kid actually does not complete education or they do not go for higher education, what happens then? So let's talk about withdrawal. Now let's talk about this example where I invest $250 per month for 18 years at, let's assume, 8% year-on-year return. It could be more, it could be high, we don't know that. And that actually compounds to about $134,860, but withdrawal is not as straightforward because this particular amount is broken down into 3 parts. The first part is your contribution of $50,000. That was our contribution that we made every single month. Then there is a CESG grant, which is $7,200. So that is something that the government has given. And the third one is the accumulated income. It's called AIP, Accumulated Income Plan. And that's $77,660. This is all the growth, all the compounding. You have just more than doubled your money in the last 18 years because you have invested in assets that are growing, and all the dividends and everything has just compounded the money. And the $77,660 is all the growth component of this $134,000, which is more than half of the entire amount. Now you can withdraw anytime, any amount tax-free from your contribution because that's your money. It's already tax-paid dollars. You don't have to do anything. You can actually withdraw it anytime, anywhere, even before the kid is going into college, whatever, right? So that's your contribution, that's yours to be used. But this $7,200 and $77,660, the accumulated income and the grant, it can only be used if your child goes for post-secondary education, and it's taxed at child's tax rate, which is amazing. So one of the strategies that I've read about is that people actually use the grant and the accumulated income first towards the fees, because you can take out the contribution anytime later as well, and you will not be taxed on that. But because in the early years of child's education, they're not earning enough money, therefore it's almost tax-free for them because they get grants and they get all sorts of benefits. For the first $15,000 of income, you actually do not pay any tax as a student. So all that actually accounts for the child actually paying almost next to zero tax or very little tax at a very small rate, and it's much smaller than what you would pay if it was taxed at your rate. So but it can only be used if they are going for education. Now, in order to take this money out, you have to produce a proof of enrollment. That's very important. And it can be used for tuition fees. It can be used for lodging. It can be used for, like living expenses. If you're moving from, let's say, Canada to US, it can be used for relocation, transportation, whatever, right? So they don't care, how you use that money, but they do care that you are using it towards education related expenses, and you are using it reasonably while you are studying. It cannot be that you are not studying and you're taking the benefit. That's very important to note when it comes to taking out money from the grant and the accumulated income. Now, another question that was asked was, what if they attend a college outside of Canada? I had this question as well. A lot of people asked me on Instagram as well. And there's the QR code. I'll also link this in the description. You can just go there and you can look at the list of universities which are available. You would see a list of, provinces. You'll see international here. You can just click here, and this is all the list, and you can actually search for it as well somewhere here. And this is the entire list here. You can search, and this is the entire list. And there are some Indian institutions also available. I looked at IIM, IIT. I did not find them. So if you are trying to send your kid to India for higher studies, then make sure that you are looking at this list, whether the RESP grant or the accumulated income can actually be used. RESP can can actually be used towards that education or not, but it has to be in that list, and only then can you use the RESP grant. And this is a very comprehensive list. Most of the good colleges and universities are here, both in Canada and internationally. But yeah, that's hopefully this will answer your question of whether RESP can be used internationally or not. The answer is yes. The other big one is, what if they don't attend college or university? This is a big one for me, because I think Aryan would learn a lot about business at home. I also think that, and this is very controversial, but I also think that education is a little bit obsolete with AI and everything. I say this with the most humility, right? I'm not saying education is crap, but I do feel that it's much more advanced. Our normal life is much more advanced than what we are being taught. Unless, obviously Aryan wants to become a lawyer or a doctor or dentist. I'm no one to come in his way. But I feel that there is a chance that Aryan might not attend university, especially if he wants to learn business, which he can learn at home. Again, I don't know that. I don't want to come in his way. He'll be an 18-year-old, mind of his own. But what are the options if they don't attend college or university? Because it's important to at least know what's going to happen at that time. Option one is you keep the RESP open for 36 years and maybe they'll change their mind later and they'll have the access to RESP. Obviously, it will be a lot bigger. The RESP will be a lot because it's compounded for 18 more years. But yeah, they can still use that for 36 years, and after that, they'll have to take it out. Option number two is you can withdraw your contribution of $50,000 tax-free. So that money, like I said, you can withdraw anytime, and the grant plus accumulated income can be transferred to a sibling, but the condition is that it should be a real sibling, a brother or a sister. Aryan should have a brother or a sister. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but they should be less than 21 years of age when we are transferring. Plus the grant, if we already have a grant in the other child's name of $7,200, the grant will just be $7,200. So the grant will not be transferred because we already have maxed out on the second child's grant. But the accumulated income, which is a massive portion, we saw $70,000, $77,000. That's a massive amount of money that can actually be transferred to the sibling's name, and that's great because one child does not want to pursue education, the other child wants to become a doctor, which costs a lot more. It could help fund the second child's education. Anyways, we don't know all of that, but here's option number 3, which is probably the most commonly used option in case the child does not pursue education. Now, we talked about this, let's say the accumulated everything, it's all compounded to $134,860. This is if you do $250 per month for 18 years at 8% year-on-year return. $50,000 contribution, we have the CESG grant, and we have the accumulated income, and these three things are treated very differently. The first one is $50,000. Like I said, we can withdraw tax-free. This can be done irrespective, so you can withdraw this money tax-free, $50,000. You lose the CESG grant because the kid does not go for post-secondary education, and all this money actually went away because the government will not give you if they don't, study. And the third one, which is a massive portion, it's like bigger than any other contribution, is the accumulated income, and that $50,000 of that can be transferred into RRSP, and there are certain conditions. I'll talk about that in a bit. However, the remainder $27,660, so if you deduct $50,000, so $50,000 got transferred to RRSP, the remainder of this, you have to pay income tax. And this is not capital gain tax, this is income tax, and that is probably going to be at the highest tax bracket of 53%, and you'll pay that on the $27,000, so 53% on the $27,000, and they'll also slap an additional penalty of 20% on this amount. So you'll actually be paying about 73%. If I was to take this money out now, I'll be paying 73% in penalty and taxes, and all this will be done on my income and not my child's income. So that's a pretty hefty tax and penalty, or whatever you call it, you pay. And the RRSP, you have to have RESP open for 10 plus year to transfer this money into RRSP, and it's your RRSP, not your child's RRSP, because they don't have room, probably they'll not have income at that time. Maybe they will, I don't know. Your child has to be 21 plus. So in fact, it's more than $77,000 because it will compound for the next 3 years, because this is assuming 18 years. If we have to be, the child has to be 21 years, then we'll have to compound this by another 3 years, so it will be more than $77,000, and they should not be in school, and you should have enough RRSP room. It should not be that your RRSP room is like already maxed out because you are high income and you still have $50,000 that you can roll over into RRSP. You have to have room in your RRSP in order to do that. So if those conditions are true, then you can win a little bit. Now, I did create a scenario on this as well. Let's talk about that. Only if child doesn't go to university, what happens then? So the tax-free withdrawal will be $50,000 that I talked about. That's your contribution. This is again, okay, let's just change this to, let me change this to the scenario that I am using for Aryan. So let's assume this is a scenario where I'll compound to about $134,860. I'm investing $250 per month. $50,000 of tax-free withdrawal. I can do that. That's my money. No tax, nothing. I'll just take it out. Lose the CESG grant. $7,200 is being deducted. And the accumulated income is about $77,660. This is all the growth that happened. Because I max transfer to RRSP, assuming I have room, and I can always plan for that, right? I'll always have room in my RRSP of $50,000, hopefully. So let's say I am able to utilize all of that, and then my taxable income becomes $27,660. I pay the marginal tax of, let's say, 53%. It could be lower for you, but let's say you are in the highest marginal tax bracket of 53%. The penalty is, let's say, 20%. Because 20% penalty is something that the government will be charging you. The tax plus penalty on the $27,660 will be $20,000. That's bizarre. Anyways, the after-tax proceeds that will come to your account is $7,468. You also had $50,000 of your own money, your own contribution, plus you have the RRSP of $50,000. So you are left with about $107,468. And here, RRSP is still taxable. So, the $50,000, whenever you take out in your retirement, it will still be taxed as your income tax. So it's not like all of this money is tax-free. Now, if you withdraw for any reason, your kid is going into university in India that is not listed on the CRA website, or you have to leave Canada and you have to move to the US for your work, and your child is also moving to US and they are not able to use RESP for any reason whatsoever, you do not use your RESP money and you withdraw it, it will be a massacre. So let's talk about this. Tax-free withdrawal will be $50,000. You lose the CSG grant, $7,200. Remaining accumulated income is still $77,660, but you cannot move it to RRSP because you're not living in Canada for any reason. You are not able to move to RRSP, or you don't have room in RRSP, whatever might be the reason. Your taxable income becomes $77,660. Again, assuming a 53% marginal rate and a 20% penalty, you'll be paying $56,000 in penalty and be left with $70,000. And of that $71,000, $50,000 was your own money anyways, because that was your contribution. So if your child, you're convinced that your child is not going to pursue education, at least from the colleges that they are, or you are not going to live in Canada while they are pursuing education, because you have to be a Canadian resident and have a valid SIN number, both you and your child, I would not recommend doing RESP at all. Because if you invest that money, and this is for all those people who have those doubts, if you invest this $50,000 into, or let's say $250 a month, into a normal investing account, non-registered investing account, and it grows for 8% for 18 years, your total contribution is $54,000, slightly higher because you don't have any limits there. You can invest whatever. Your end balance will be $121,872. So it's higher, or it's lower because you don't have the grant here. So your grant is not being compounded. So it's lower. It's $134,000 if you do RESP, $121,000 if you do, but you have the advantage of taxing it at capital gain rate. So on 50% of this, you are not taxed anything. Your taxable income is $67,872. Even on a marginal tax rate, you'll only be taxed $18,000 on the entire amount, and you'll take home $103,000, $104,000, which is way more than $71,000 if you were to invest in RESP and not utilize the RESP and you have to withdraw for any reason. So that's the reason why and this is the reason why I am not doing any front loading. Because if I do the front loading, let's say if I do the $2,500 divided by 12, and if I do the $14,000 of front loading, obviously I'll maximize my gains in RESP, and that's great if RN goes to college. But if he does not go to college, I'll be losing almost $44,000 in taxes and penalty because I front loaded everything and I had to pay a lot more tax on a lot more taxable income, which is why I'm hesitant in front loading my RESP, purely because I am not that confident that Aryan would go to university. Now, I could be wrong and I could be losing $30,000 in accumulated growth, but I am okay to live with. So there's no right or wrong answer here. You can do the math using this calculator. If you feel that you should front load, whether it's $14,000 in year one or you split it across the first 3-4 years, I would highly encourage that to maximize your RESP. But if you are someone like me who is in doubt whether our kids will go to education or the education system would exist, we don't know, right? 18 years is a long time. Like 18 years back, we were in 2007. Like subprime crisis had not happened, and we did not have AI revolution, and we did not have chat GPTs and video chat, and there's so many things that were not there in 2007. So the world that we live in today is not the same, and it's not going to be the same in 18 years as well. And that's the reason why I am willing to take that risk of not front loading my RESP and maximizing the gains, and rather invest that money into some other asset class or my retirement. And I think $134,000 will also be a head start that I'll give to Aryan once he goes to education. That's all I have for today. I hope you like this video. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए बाय बाय.